Everybody, welcome back. My name is Yumble, and I'm here today to talk to you about Traffic Manager President Edition. So Traffic Manager is a mod for City Skylines, the version on PC, and it's downloadable from the Steam Workshop for free, and many people consider it to be a fundamental mod to the game. I just want to show you some basic uses for it, and maybe even a few more advanced options that you might enjoy. So I've included a link in the description of this video to the current Labs version of Traffic Manager. Labs is essentially kind of a beta or a trying ground for the latest and greatest features of Traffic Manager. I'm on 11.5. Some of these things may have changed in the meantime, but currently this is where we're at. This is the current version of the Labs version of Traffic Manager. When you subscribe to it, you'll get this toggle button, and that can be moved anywhere on your screen. I choose to keep it in the toolbar and just use it as like an icon, the same way you'd use any of these. And I've actually turned up the menu. The menu you're looking at here is turned up to probably 200%, just for visibility reasons. But I want to go over all of the different settings and options that there are on this menu, and we're also going to go into the settings and options in the game, you know, the pause menu. There's an entire options menu dedicated to Traffic Manager, and that's very important as well. But for now, let's just go across this menu and we'll see what we can do to our traffic by default. The first button in the upper left-hand corner is Toggle Traffic Lights, and by default, the game will add, City Skylines by default will add a traffic light at major junctions, so anytime you cross an avenue type road or a 4-lane or bigger type road, I believe, it automatically adds a default vanilla kind of traffic light, which they don't tend to be very good. If you're going to use traffic lights, I recommend deactivating the initial traffic light, which will cause a mess initially, but eventually I recommend going back and using the second option, which is a timed traffic light. Timed traffic lights are quite involved, so I think we're going to revisit a timed traffic light in just a minute, and I'll show you how that works. I don't ever use manual traffic lights. I'm not entirely sure of the difference, but I've had much better luck with timed traffic lights in general. But moving across, the lane connector allows you to specify which lane a given lane is forced to go into. So let's say this one has a right turn arrow, so it's going to turn right. By default, this truck can go into any lane it wants. This car that's now backed up can go into any lane it wants. If you wanted to tell it to go to a specific lane, you can specify that with a lane connector. I've found that lane connectors are crucial for interchanges. If you want things to work correctly, there's another setting that I recommend turning on in Traffic Manager that's important as well. But lane connectors are very important for like a diverging diamond like this to work correctly. Less important, somewhat less important when you're dealing with regular junctions. Maybe you'll find occasions where you want to add lane connectors, but generally I recommend using lane arrows, which, hey, guess what? Conveniently, lane arrows are the next button. As I said before, if a lane connector tells the vehicle which lane to turn into specifically, or which lane to pass into across the junction, or which lane to go left to, or whatever the case may be, a lane arrow tells the car which way to turn, or tells the vehicle which direction it's going to go to, whether it's straight, left, or right. There's only 3 different ways to go, straight, left, and right. If you don't care which lane it's going to go into on the other side, like in most junctions, at least in the US, people will turn just like that taxi did, where if you know that you, if you know that you have to change lanes up ahead, and you have a green light here and it's solid green, you can get into whatever lane you want. It can actually be beneficial to leave that open, to leave people open to turn in whatever direction or go across into whatever lane they choose. If they have, say, a left turn coming up or a right turn coming up, but there's no node there on this road, as cars can only change lanes at nodes. So if you want to leave that, if you want to leave it up to the vehicle and the pathing system to determine where the car goes, use lane arrows. Frequently, that's what you'll use at intersections like this, whereas lane connectors, I believe, are better used for highway intersections and places where you really want them to keep to their lane and not change lanes erratically. Moving on, this button, I went over this in Realistic Cities, in our Realistic Cities building video, or ways to make the game more realistic using mods. This toggles automatic vehicle despawning. I always leave this on. What that means is that the vehicles won't disappear if they're stuck in traffic. By default, in vanilla Skylines, vehicles will automatically despawn if they're stuck in traffic for too long. And if you've ever run into a problem where, let's say, your police can't make it through, or your ambulances or your hearses or garbage trucks, and you're losing tax dollars because citizens are moving out and you're losing population, that may be because vehicles aren't getting through. This isn't a solution to the vehicles not getting through, but it is a solution to them disappearing because they can't get through. I do recommend disabling automatic despawning. Vehicles don't despawn in real life. They wait to get through. You know, you don't just disappear and wind up at home if you're stuck in traffic, and certainly you don't. Why would you want your services disappearing? Leaving this off will not solve traffic problems. It'll just make service vehicles disappear and buildings kind of die and close as a result of the vehicles disappearing. So I definitely recommend disabling automatic vehicle despawning. You can tell it's checked. It's blue by default. I haven't clicked it. It's already blue. Moving on. Priority signs. Fun fact about a lot of these, if you hover the tooltip, you'll actually find that control clicking will enable automatic functions of each of these buttons. So let's go to this, a somewhat lesser, less important junction. If I control click, it'll set up a priority junction here. Well, that's no good. If I shift click, it'll definitely set up a priority junction. So it's determined that this road is the main road, and we've added yield signs or give way signs, depending what part of the world you're from, on these crossing roads, which is fine. That's a totally legitimate way to set up a low flow junction like this. Yield means that for those of you that aren't drivers, or hopefully if you are a driver and you don't know this, I'm about to enlighten you. You have been upsetting people. The upside down triangle, at least in the US and probably other places, means that you'll pull up to the junction and you don't have to stop, but you do have to look both ways and make sure that you're not going to hit anybody, because they have the right of way, which is what this triangle, this diamond denotes. The diamond means specifically, it means you can click the trash can to get rid of any of these settings in any of these buttons, but the triangle means priority. So these areas have priority. You can click manually to add a yield on both sides. If you click again, you'll add a stop sign. The distinction between yield and stop is that a stop sign means all vehicles will come to a complete stop. Once again, if you're a driver and you don't know this, my goodness, please. The vehicles all come to a complete stop, which may be unnecessary. In Skylines, it's arguably completely unnecessary, unless you want ultimate realism. You can do yields at most junctions and be totally fine, and the vehicles will stop if there's a car approaching, if they're going to conflict, or they'll coast through if there's no conflict. See that one, because of the yield, that ambulance cut it a little close to the bus, but that's what the yield does, and you can get rid of those settings by clicking the trash can. The lane arrows, if you control click using lane arrows, check this out. Well, I've already done it. I've already done it at a lot of these. If you control click, it'll actually toggle through. You can see that these arrows are changing and these arrows are changing. By control clicking the lane arrows tool at a junction, it'll cycle through different options for automatic lane configurations, but it'll really try to separate the lanes by dedicated left-hand turns, dedicated straight through, and dedicated right-hand turns, so that there's not so much of this. This is a 4-lane road, so of course we're going to have, something's got to give. If we're going to have all 3 directions available, one of them has to be shared, but this one has a dedicated left-hand turn, which I generally recommend, and a shared straight through, and a shared right-hand turn. Those two are combined. Keep your wits about you with each of these, because you can set up a timed traffic light really quickly that way. You can set up yields very quickly with control shift clicking. This is what makes the roundabout work. I'm not going to explain what needs to go into a roundabout to set it up, because I've actually got a whole nother video dedicated to that, but I will tell you that click the priority signs button, shift, control, click, and it will set it up for you. I didn't even have this one set up correctly until just now. These yields weren't in place, or these giveaways were not in place. But what we've done is effectively turned this into a priority road. This 3-lane road that doubles back on itself eternally has now been converted to priority, which means the incoming traffic all has to yield, and it means that this traffic all has the right of way, all has priority to go. It also sets up the junction what are these called? Junction restrictions. So let's do that next. Junction restrictions are things like these options here. So I'm going to click this this little intersection here. This button allows traffic to enter a blocked junction. I don't know if it'll say that if I hover it, but that's what that symbol means. It means, can this car, this lonely vehicle who desperately wants to go hang out with his friends, can he enter this junction even if his friends cannot make it through? And the answer in this case, as it's set up automatically, is yes. We want these priority vehicles to keep moving forward at all costs. At other intersections, you wouldn't really want to do that. If I were to take this one and say, hey, come on in, even if the intersection's blocked, come on through. Perfect example, wow. You really don't want these non-priority vehicles to just head out into the intersection. But that's a very, very powerful and potentially dangerous and debilitating button if you overuse it improperly. In this case, we would not want the traffic from this direction to enter the blocked roundabout. Imagine that. If this is blocked by the priority traffic, we do not want vehicles just cruising for a bruising. Like, if all the vehicles will come in, it'll fix your traffic on the temporary, but it won't really fix your traffic problems in a bigger sense. So I recommend leaving that off unless you're sure that you want traffic to enter the blocked junction. The other options are crosswalks. You can see I've also got a mod installed that visually deactivates the crosswalk. So by default, if you find that you can still see your crosswalks, get RM Crossings, I believe it's called. RM Crossings has some dependencies. I'll try to link this in the description. Remind me if I forget to. But that pairs great with crosswalk deactivator here in the junctions. The other options are U-turns. So if you wanted someone to make a U-turn in this roundabout, honestly, I really don't usually recommend making U-turns available unless you have a major median road and you'd really like for them to turn left to turn around somewhere else. Like, let's say you don't want anyone to make a left at this junction. Let's say you've got the left turn arrow deactivated here, and you think it would be better. This generally wouldn't be a thing, but maybe they want to come down here and make a U-turn and come back. You could use the junction restrictions options here to make U-turns available. The arrow button here, the crossing arrow, means it's saying, do you want cars to change lanes when they're going through the junction? So it's kind of like an alternate version of lane connector. Imagine lane connector, but with all available options connected when crossing through the junction. Do you want them to be able to change lanes when they're going through the junction? I generally recommend leaving that off as well. Mess with a roundabout, make a roundabout, shift, control, click the roundabout with this, and it'll set up the lane connectors properly. It'll set up all the turns properly. This one's easy. I've clicked the speed limits button here, that 30 logo with the European speed limit sign, and I've got US speed limits listed here. So wow, miles per hour, interesting. If you click an amount, you click one of these signs and zoom in, you'll notice that the roads all have certain, they all have predetermined values set for speed limit. So the asset creator who made this road, not this road, that's a poor example, but some of these, like this is a 25 mile per hour road. That's fine. You know, that's great. If you wanted to change that to 30, hey, go for it. Why not? I think if you want to de-emphasize certain roads or emphasize certain roads for the pathing system, your arterials should be a little bit faster so that vehicles are drawn to it. Because vehicles, I believe the game factors in speed limit, where if I make a little side road 5 miles per hour, vehicles are going to avoid that little side road. Maybe I don't want as many cars on this little stretch here, so we'll turn it down to 10 miles per hour. And what I did there to select the whole road, you can see how I'm kind of toggling. If you shift click, you'll select the entire road, the entire segment of road all the way to the next junction, and try to get traffic moving on your bigger roads to respect road hierarchy by kind of manipulating the system. Moving on, another one. Banning traffic, vehicle restrictions, right? So let's say on this road here, we definitely want to allow traffic to come here because this is a residential area, but I don't really want trucks using this road to get to the mall. This is a mall over here, there's a loading dock back here, and there's deliveries at the front and whatnot, and maybe we don't actually want trucks to come through. So this is for commercial vehicles, banned. Commercial vehicles now cannot drive on this road. And the options here, if I remember correctly, are SOS are services, so like emergency services. The recycling is your trash trucks. The truck there is commercial, as I said. Taxis are next, the little light on top. Buses have their own category to the game, so buses are allowed here. That's a bus route. And then these are vehicles, just regular, I want to call them consumer vehicles. Citizen vehicles, we'll call them. So the cars and trucks that drive around for the citizens. And you can ban all of those. And the same rule applies where if you shift-click on a given road, if I click this and then shift-click, you can see this whole segment will light up. So shift-clicking SOS means no emergency vehicles. Don't necessarily do that unless you have a stretch of road where you really don't want emergency vehicles to go. But a useful tactic with this, or a useful approach, might be to make a road that's for service vehicles only, or make a road that's for buses only, by banning everything except for buses. And then you've made your own bus lane. You don't have to rely on whether the bus lane road that you want exists. You can make a bus-only road that looks just like any other road, but vehicles are banned on it, so you can have like a bus terminal. That's just one use of many. But moving on. No parking restrictions. All of these roads are parkable unless there's no parking on the side of the road. So this road just does not have parking spaces. There's a bike lane, there's a median, and there's lanes. So there's no toggle for this road, nor would there be a toggle for this road over here. But if you find that one of the roads that you're using has parking enabled and you don't want it to, you can ban parking for that section, and those cars will move to a different part of the city. If there's cars parked there, they'll move away. The last one is clear traffic. Unless you have a glitch going on in your game, or unless it's backed up and gridlocked so hard that it won't fix itself, I don't generally recommend clearing the traffic. Barring those things I just said. If you've got massive problems, then clear the traffic, go for it, do what you got to do. But generally, I recommend kind of playing it out and fixing the traffic using the traffic manager tools, or using better road hierarchy, and then letting the simulation run, maybe on 3-speed, to get it done faster. But if you find there's a glitch or an error, or the vehicles aren't pathing correctly, or there's a pop-up on your screen that says like cannot find path or something to that effect, feel free to clear your traffic in emergencies and kind of reset your expectations. Reset your game, reset all of the simulated traffic back to zero so that it can all spawn again and see what happens. Moving on to our options settings for Traffic Manager. In the menu here, so this is just the regular click the gear in the top right corner, or hit escape, go to options. Traffic Manager can be selected by pressing the T button over and over until you see Traffic Manager, and that goes for all the mods. So get down with that. Don't go scouring for mods. Just press the first letter over and over, and eventually you'll find Traffic Manager. This is really probably underrated, I think. Like, Traffic Manager has some amazing settings and some stuff that I think should be changed by default. I have not found a way to make my settings default in the game, so every time I start a new map or a new save, not a new save, but every time I start a new build, I go in and I make sure that the settings are correct in here, and they never are. So I go through and I change them to be my liking. You can lock the button, you can change the user interface scale. I'm going to go back to 100. I turned it up to 200 for everyone's benefit, or whatever that is, 250. Transparency options, tutorial messages. Leave this on if you're new to the tools in Traffic Manager. But if once you're familiar with things, turn it off. Notify of mod conflicts. Display your speed limit signs as US miles per hour instead of kilometers per hour. US signs, all that kind of stuff. The simulation is very important. You can you can wreck the overhead of your CPU very quickly. You can overrun your CPU and lose frames really quickly if you crank this too high. I tend to run it at low. I think by default it's probably very low, but I run it at low. Apply changes right away so you don't have to reload the game. But at your discretion, crank it up if you'd like and see how it's working. Maybe in a bigger city, you're not going to like that as much, probably. Reckless driving percentage. This is like how many drivers do you want to disobey your laws? Basically, if you set up a timed traffic light, how many people do you want running that light? In reality, I don't know how many people run lights. If you run lights and you're listening, please stop. Please don't do that. I don't recommend it. So I'm going to turn this to 2% just so for a little realism. So there's a few cars that are kind of driving too fast. You'll see them zooming around periodically. So either 2 or 5% are what I'd recommend. Individual driving styles are on by default. Road condition is cool if you're into that sort of thing. If you're into building the road, there are trucks that can go around and maintain the road if you build the road maintenance building. I don't really do that, so moving on to disable despawning. This is the same toggle as we spoke about earlier. I leave that on. I strongly recommend leaving that on. Advanced vehicle AI, I do it to 20%, I think. Yep. Dynamic lane selection to 20%. People wonder how to get vehicles to use all the lanes on their highways, and I think a few ways to do it. This is one way to do it, is to turn up the dynamic lane selection so that cars change lanes. If you crank it too much, the cars will change lanes kind of unnecessarily, and you'll notice that every node, it becomes like a free-for-all lane change thing on the highway. But 20% seems good, for my purposes at least. I always also use, next one, realistic parking AI. Turn that on if you want realistic parking in your city, but be warned that your traffic will go up if you don't supply, your traffic backup will become more prevalent if you don't supply parking. So make sure to get parking garages and parking lot roads or big parking lots or whatever mod you need to make parking lots from the Steam Workshop, as there aren't really parking lots in the default game except built into assets, incidentally. But yeah, that's a good one. Very CPU heavy. Keep in mind, every time you make changes in this, you may be taxing your CPU in your computer a little bit harder, or a lot harder, potentially. But yeah, I recommend that if you're looking for a more realistic experience. And public transport, I've not quantified the difference this makes, but it's called Prevent Unnecessary Transfers at Public Transport Stations. I haven't noticed a difference with that, but I always tend to turn it on, because why would you want unnecessary transfers? Moving on. Policies, something I recommend turning off right away. I typically leave all of these default, except this one is always checked when I start a new map. Automatically add traffic lights. I do not want it to automatically add traffic lights at junctions. What that means is all of your avenues, all of your arterial roads will have traffic lights on them, and they're going to be the vanilla traffic lights. They're not going to be the timed traffic lights that I spoke of earlier. So I turn that off, and if a junction is getting backed up, or if for realism I want to add a light, I'll go in and I'll add that light myself. I'm going to have to make a video about timed traffic lights. That deserves its own video, really. But I leave that off for sure. It's bad. I don't want the vanilla lights. They're not good. Vehicle restrictions, aggression. I forget what the default is on this. I would recommend either normal or high, probably, just to allow a little flexibility for cars if they want to use a bus lane real quick or something like that. Normal or high, probably. And I always check these off. Ban private cars or trucks in bus lanes. Contrary to what I literally just said, if I'm going to have a bus lane, I typically want that to be for buses. But there may be other restrictions that this affects. Enable highway-specific lane merging and splitting rules. Check that off for good results. I'd recommend it. It means traffic stays in its lane and exits the highway and enters the highway without changing lanes. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. I'm not going to explain it more than that. It's as if you've added lane connectors. We'll put it that way. It's as if you've just added lane connectors to go straight through. Heavy vehicles prefer outer lanes on highways. I always check that off as well. That's great. Just let the trucks stay on the outer lanes and let the other cars pass if possible. These are your default roundabout settings. Pedestrians can't cross to the middle unless there's something in the middle that you want them to get to, like a park. I would leave that checked. Pedestrians shall not cross roads approaching the roundabout. That's if you want to turn off crosswalks when on the roads that are approaching the roundabout. All those perpendicular roads that are facing the roundabout, if you want them to be able to cross before reaching said roundabout, leave that unchecked. Stay in lane inside the roundabout automatically adds lane connectors. Stay in lane on the roads approaching is good. I recommend that. Allocate dedicated exit lanes. Yes, all of the above. This will affect your Control-Shift-Click when you're using the yield sign button. I forget what that button's called, but the stop sign button, the yield sign button. This affects that when you're Control-Shift-Clicking a roundabout to do it automatically. That is all correct there, for the way I like it at least. I never change any of these things. This is optional. Maintenance is if you want to reset stuff or, reset configurations or what have. Keybinds are for hotkeys. I'm not very good at hotkeys, That's okay though. But yeah, I recommend going through all these settings and making sure everything is correct whenever you start a new build. Closing notes on Traffic Manager. If you ever know that you want traffic to stay in their lane at a given node, click on the lane connector option, click the node, and hit Control S is the default option there. Control S will let you toggle lane connectors for a given node. So if you find that people are changing lanes there a bunch and you don't want them to change lanes and you don't feel like drawing each of these by connecting the lane manually, Control S. That is it. That's Traffic Manager as I know it, as I understand it. There's probably a bit more that can be found in the wiki surrounding this. There's definitely a link to that in the asset itself in the Steam Workshop. So I'd recommend looking at that if you want to see some of the higher functions of it. But that is the way that I use Traffic Manager to improve traffic in my cities and get traffic to flow the way I want it to. Thank you for hanging out. I really appreciate it, guys. The channel has been, I suppose, helping some people learn some stuff, and I've really enjoyed making these videos, and I intend to continue. Let me know if you have any feedback for me in the comments or if you have any questions. Also, feel free to check out my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/YumbleTV. Thanks for being here, and I will see you in the next stream or the next video.